The autograph. At around 5 p.m, Lennon's and Chapman's worlds collided for the first time. John Ono Lennon, world superstar and cultural icon, a man prone to depression and mood swings, stepped out of the Dakota apartments with his wife on his way to a recording studio. Mark David Chapman, a nobody who had previously attempted suicide and was a man prone to depression and mood swings, stood outside the same building. Suddenly, out of nowhere, there he was, the superstar, the icon, and Chapman froze. His first instinct was not to draw his gun. He simply froze like any awed fan face to face with John Lennon. He'd bought Lennon's latest album, Double Fantasy, the day before, and as Lennon approached, he wordlessly thrust the album in front of him. Lennon dutifully signed the album, John Lennon, 1980. Amateur photographer Goresh, an opportunist who had once posed as a delivery man in order to get into the Dakota, saw his opportunity and snapped the final pictures of John Lennon alive, signing an autograph for the man who would soon end his life. In the picture, Chapman's smile/smirk could be equally interpreted as a devilish appreciation of what was to happen later, or simply that of a fan, his demons temporarily set aside, happy to get his album signed by the man himself. One source has stated that Chapman asked Lennon for a job during their encounter, but this is unverified. It's also been written that after giving the autograph, Lennon asked Chapman, "Is that all you want?" And some even go further and have Lennon asking him a second time, and there being a moment suspended in time, as if Lennon had some mystical or at least vibrational awareness of something fated. I've attached a link as well to the photo. Again, quite remarkable to have this as a record, just hours before the big event of this day. The recording session. John Lennon went to the Hit Factory to record guitar on Yoko Ono's Walking on Thin Ice, his final contribution to the music business. There's also a link to John Lennon talking on the intercom about this track, Walking on Thin Ice, and there's a link to the track itself. Chapman waited with Goresh, who eventually left for the night. Many hours later, at 10:50 p.m, Chapman saw Lennon's limousine approach from the distance and park by the curb outside the Dakota. Yoko got out first, quite a way ahead of John, and passed Chapman. Lennon passed him next and may or may not have acknowledged him. And at this point, Chapman fired the shots heard around the world. Lennon's painfully thin frame was no match for the hollow point bullets of the .38 Charter Arms pistol, which ripped through him and sealed his fate. He had enough left to moan, "I'm shot," but was DOA at nearby Roosevelt Hospital 20 minutes later. As if the day couldn't get any stranger or more surreal, Chapman, upon shooting the star, simply put the smoking gun down by his feet and started reading The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger, a book he had become seemingly obsessed with over the previous 2 years. So John Lennon, sporting his vintage rock and roll haircut and leather jacket, having given the world a final set of pictures and a retrospective interview encompassing most of his life story, and signed an autograph for the worst kind of fan, was gone. As a final expression of how media dominated the world had become even then, there was one more John Lennon photo taken that day before his cremation. Caution, Grizzly. And there's a link on the blog to this photo. I imagine you might want to look at it. You probably won't want to look at it twice. It's the final photo of John Lennon. The world chose to remember him as a saint, something that Astrid Kircher, who'd befriended the young Beatles in Hamburg, thought he would have found quite amusing. Chapman has now served 30 years in Attica prison, mostly in solitary confinement. Such is the nature of his crime and the person he killed, he will probably never be released. Is this right, when others have done similar things to nobodies and served far less time? It is thought that if he was released, one of those misguided Beatles fans, young or old, who really thinks that John Lennon wrote songs for them and them alone, might earn themselves a life sentence for an act of retribution. It should be remembered that in the end, however gifted, John Lennon was just a man, all too human. So perhaps this is above all a story of the power of celebrity. Postscript. As if the story needed any more bizarre twists, how about this recollection from a rock journalist interviewing David Bowie recently? Quote, "I've been rattled more than once by a revelation from a musician for which there had been no previous report, but none more sobering than the one David Bowie gave me when the recording machine was turned off. According to Bowie, New York City police discovered that his name was second on a hit list of targets of John Lennon's assassin, Mark David Chapman. At the time of Lennon's December the 8th, 1980 murder outside of his Manhattan apartment, David Bowie was starring just blocks away on Broadway in the play The Elephant Man. I was second on his list," Bowie told me in the New York studio we shared near Madison Square Garden. Chapman had a front row ticket to The Elephant Man the next night, December the 9th. John and Yoko were supposed to sit front row for that show too. So the night after John was killed, there were 3 empty seats in the front row. I can't tell you how difficult that was to go on. I almost didn't make it through the performance. The irony is that David Bowie's first #1 hit, Fame, from the Young Americans album, was co-written with Lennon, who also played guitar on the track. And it was indeed their fame as rock stars who drew Mark David Chapman to stalk them and subsequently to murder Lennon. Just a few of my own comments. As I mentioned in the story, John Lennon is now a saint, which for me is a little bit unrealistic and is also a little bit unfair to Paul McCartney, who seems to have been demonised in some people's eyes simply for staying alive. I think it's also fair to say that Paul McCartney doesn't seem to express any strong opinions on particular topics, which is not the case of John Lennon. So I think people do rightly admire Lennon's courage. But sainted, I don't know. I think what happens when someone dies, particularly when there's a great shock, people have an instant reaction. It becomes official, and I think it's then set in stone. The facts about something, the myth of John and Yoko, and also someone's reputation. I don't think there's anything now that could come out that would sully John Lennon's reputation as a flawed genius, as a humanitarian who loved the world. But it's interesting to see how just one aspect of John Lennon's life is taken as the official line, who he was. John Lennon was noted, I think rightly, for, as I said, his honesty. But, he didn't always tell the truth. I mean, in his final interviews, when his album came out after 5 years of seclusion, about 2 months before he died, he repeatedly said that the songs of Double Fantasy were all written in a moment of inspiration. But we actually know that to be not the case, because since Lennon's death, a number of bootlegs have come out which actually suggest that he was writing songs for entire 5 years of his seclusion. He just didn't seem to finish any of them or be happy with them. And in the end, ironically, the songs that come out, rather than being just moments of inspiration, were actually often crafted from 2 or 3 different songs. So it really was the job of a craftsman, a lot of the songs on Double Fantasy, rather than being the work of an inspired genius. So, it's not only Paul McCartney who can be rather glib in front of the cameras. I think that's part of being a celebrity. You have to play the game, and when the legend contradicts the facts, print the legend, or in this case, speak the legend. Final thoughts. As I said in my story, John Lennon was a man. I don't think we should look up to people. I think it can be very detrimental if you think about the years of people looking up to gods and deities. I think it's a very dangerous thing in many ways, and I think it's misguided as well. You can look at any of the figures which are considered sacred cows: Gandhi, Martin Luther King, the recently deceased Nelson Mandela, Mother Teresa, and I'm sure you'd find in all of them a dark side. So I think we need to remember that people are human, and we need to remember that it's not healthy to look up to these people. We should take the good things out of their life, but also recognise the dark sides as well.